Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're going to be taking a look at a Chimera rune deck for rotation. I was kind of stuck for ideas on what to do, and I've been trying a few decks and none really got off the ground, so kind of just went back to an old kind of rotation Chimera deck, and we've thrown in a couple of different things. So Truth of Adjudication, I've thrown in a single Moon and Sun because it's actually quite a solid card even on 3, and other than that really just messed around with a little bit of the numbers here, so just making sure, you know, Consecration's down slightly and everything else is pretty straightforward. Of course, Triple Seraphic Blade, it's super solid card you can't really go wrong with at the moment in the current meta, so we're going to get right into this and check it out. So this deck is by no means overpowered. I would say it's a fairly balanced deck, honestly. It's definitely probably not going to keep up with the top 2 metas being Dragon and Blood, but when it comes to pretty much any other matchup, you're pretty well set. Even, I suppose, Dragon can be okay. You just need to be able to mitigate a lot of the big drops by using removal on them. Dark Feast Bat, there isn't much you can do with this deck in particular outside of Truth's Adjudication and hope for a decent heal on your face and block out as much as you can. So we're actually starting off with what I'd consider probably one of the best hands I've had in a long time. Super early game cards, no real issue from our opponent either, which is great. So this one's probably going to be a reasonably quick game, which is good because this deck can go quite quickly if the opponent is an opposing Rune player, as they really don't put down too much pressure, which is easy to deal with. Since we can go for the double insight play and now a Mysterious Knowledge, we're looking at a massive amount of spell boost for a very, very small amount of turns. So we've already spell boost 5 times on the Fiery, which is absolutely nuts, especially considering we're only on turn 4 now. So I do decide to go for the Cagliostra. Being able to use Cagliostra does give us the couple of extra points to mess around with, especially for something like Mysterious Circle, so a really nice way to just get that extra spell boost and set up an Ars Mangus, which is pretty much perfect for this kind of matchup. Fortunately, they did just Wind Blast and draw cards, so not really a big issue yet, and we're just going to pretty much throw to the board here and stack it up as much as we can, throwing down the Flame Destroyer as a 3-drop on 5. Really couldn't ask for a quicker hand here. From here, our opponent really doesn't have many options. I mean, they can use this Cagliostra they just got, they might kill off a couple of things, but they still have to deal with a massive 7/7. And considering we have Fiery Embrace, Ars Mangus, Wind Blast, we're looking at a lot of decent removal. So really all we have to do is buy a couple of turns till Giant Chimera to win the game, or our opponent can concede. They're really the only 2 big options that they've got. So I go for the Moon and Sun, since it's a recyclable card. And we slam 9 damage to the opponent's face. So with only 8 health left, it's really not a lot. So it's definitely going to help them. Healing 3 is definitely an advantage. But it's probably not going to be enough. And they obviously realize that, completely conceding this game. And our next matchup is against Midsword. Midsword's been reasonably popular, at least in the last few days. I've fought quite a few Midsword players, and it seems to be a pretty strong deck. I would like to cover it more in depth myself, but unfortunately it does require quite a few legendaries and a lot of high-end ones, so it's not always the easiest thing to do. Of course, not every Midsword will be the same. I have seen some Highlander versions of Midsword, which have been pretty okay, but they are still quite legendary heavy. But most Midswords tend to be your typical kind of flood on 7 and basically secure big drops after that. So we start off pretty reasonably. I mean, having a 1-drop is always important, so trying to mulligan for those always helps. I tend to hold on to 1 Giant Chimera if I have it early, as holding on to at least 1 is a good advantage to have. So at the moment, it's really just going to be a matter of us defending ourselves, so taking out anything in the early game here, till we can get to kind of the mid to late game where we can really start to roll our opponent over. So there is a Frontline Cavalier. And we draw the Magic Missile. I probably should have just went for the Cagliostra and then Magic Missile, cleared out this 3/4 instead of going for the Magic Owl, but this still worked out pretty nicely and gave us a pretty decent spell boosting turn. So it's probably just a little bit worse than going for the Cagliostra play. Plus, fortunately, thanks to the Dragon Knight coming down here, we're going to be able to use Cagliostra and a Magic Missile to actually clear him out. It is going to cost us both of them, but I'm willing to accept that at this point. especially when I'm throwing double Fate's Hand to this board this time round and having a nice insight as well. So definitely a nice way to stock a hand back up. So the super cute alchemist, of course, you can't really go wrong with her. So we get a nice draw, and it's the Truth's Adjudication, so definitely one of my more favourite cards from this expansion, just because it's a fun one to play. Whether it's consistent or not, that's up to you, but it is a quite solid card. Being able to both deal damage, heal, and throw a ward down, guaranteed a minimum 3/3 ward, with a pretty decent spread on everything else normally, is always a lot of fun. The only real problem is getting it spell boosted enough. I find that typically I don't get massive spell boosts when I'm playing it. But then that could just be a deck building problem at this point. So, Magical Marksman, not really a huge issue. And Queen isn't going to be a problem. I'm probably just going to throw the double Fiery into the next turn, as I feel like that would be the best play looking at this board. As double Fiery is going to spell boost twice and deal with these, since we can't actually use damage cards due to them blocking us out. But we've got pretty much everything else we could need at this point. It's just going to be a matter of taking out their board as we go. So, Seraphic Blade might have been okay. Decided to favour the Flame Destroyer instead, because that could open a potential lethal with Giant Chimera, as that thing has been spell boosted, quite insane at this point. But they've used pretty decent spells here with their gilded cards, or loot cards as I'd rather call them, much easier to use. And now we can go for a pretty comfortable Seraphic Blade and draw a card just to really pull off some extras. And of course they play King Arthur now. Fortunately we do have this Giant Chimera. It's not the best way to spend Giant Chimera's damage, as while we do have a lot of damage here, they are going to soak up 11 or 12, sorry 12 here? Yeah, 12 damage off this, which would have been lethal provided we didn't have to clear out that many followers. And a second King Arthur back to back, that's pretty nuts. Luckily we don't have to deal with too much of it, as they don't really have a lot to go off, but it's definitely a nuts thing to have to deal with in general. So Truth's Adjudication, really just aiming to get some damage to the face. Unfortunately the spread was not really in my favour in this case. So all we can do is stack the board and defend ourselves. So some more loot cards. They're definitely doing a nice job at surviving. I also didn't take any big risks. I was trying to be as cautious as I could in this matchup so that I could finish the sword player off pretty quickly. Or at least in a more functional way. And this time we just go for massive amounts of spell boost, because we know our Giant Chimera is probably going to be our finisher, and even if it isn't, we're looking at getting as much as we can now. So they're going to clear this 7/7, not really a problem. Our Giant Chimera is definitely lethal now. We would have also had an option of going for other cards and buying more time, but I think going for the guaranteed lethal is definitely the way to play it. So I would have to say, in the current meta, Chimera decks are definitely a really solid tier 2. I don't think they'd quite make it into that tier 1 bracket with Blood and Dragon, but they're definitely right on the cusp of it. They're still super solid deck. They beat out most other decks pretty easily, the only exceptions of course really being Blood, as you can't really get around that. You might run into some trouble in some matchups where Giant Chimera might just not be able to work, but overall, reasonably consistent, pretty easy to pull off, and doesn't need much modification from old expansions to really work still, so reasonably cheap if you've been playing for a while. If you guys did enjoy this video, hit the like button and subscribe. You'll find the deck list in the description below, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.